What's up, guys? It's Parallax Abstraction, and this is Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Oh, you guys know I had to do this one, didn't you? Yes, indeed. So I recently covered River City Ransom Underground, which is the new spiritual sequel to one of my favorite NES games, and one of the best brawlers as well. And, well, at the time I realized I never covered this on my channel, and that's a damn crime. So, yes, indeed, we're taking a look at the original today. So this is, well, River City Ransom. Developed by Technos for the NES originally in the late 80s, 1989 to be exact. And this is still one of my favorite NES games, and it's very interesting because it has a very devout cult following. I mean, obviously, that's why River City Ransom Underground existed. But at the time in the US, it actually didn't sell very well. This series actually had a pretty decent following in Japan. It had several spin-offs and other iterations and whatnot in Japan that never made it over here. And it continued to be a part of the Technos stable until they went out of business in 1996. But it only ever got this one entry in the United States, though we did have a couple of other things. They did a Game Boy Advance remake a couple of years ago. Well, Million did, which is the company that owned the old Technos properties up until recently when Arc System Works bought them. And there was also a Million developed new game called Tokyo Rumble that came out for the 3DS in 2013, which almost nobody heard of. I actually didn't even know about it until I started researching this. I think I'm going to try to pick myself up a copy of that at some point. But really, in terms of describing what the mechanics and stuff are of this game, I mean, I'll talk about them a little bit, but I probably would recommend that you actually just go watch my video on River City Ransom Underground, not only because that's a modern game that you can, you could buy and play right now if you want, but that game was, I'm gonna say for better or worse, a pretty faithful remake, or not remake, but pretty faithful to this game in terms of the mechanics and the core ideas of it. It was just obviously modernized in a lot of different ways in terms of systems and depth and visuals and length, etc., etc., etc. But at its core, this game is a brawler with some light RPG elements and actually open world mechanics to it as well, which is kind of the really cool thing about it that I like. This game was a very early 8-bit idea of the open world, and not in the sense that you could literally walk anywhere at any time. I mean, as you're seeing here, it is fairly linear, and we're going through different screens here to get to an ultimate objective. But the cool thing was that you could go back and forth at will and go to different places in kind of any order you wanted, and you had a series of bosses that you had to fight on your way to Slick, which is the sort of the badass who's kidnapped your girl. And you had to get through all these bosses to get to him, but you could tackle them in different orders if you wanted. Different bosses required you to do different things to draw them out and to get their attention. Some of them would just be waiting for you in certain locations. Other places you would actually have to do different actions in order to pull them out and get their attention. And you could tackle a lot of these things in very different orders. However, one thing that River City Ransom Underground didn't really capture as well as I think they could have is, well, when you don't press the wrong button and leave the store, is this. So, one of the things people really like about this is the iconic Technos character style, which is this weirdly proportioned, I don't know if chibi's the right term, I don't even know what the hell a chibi is really, but it's, they're oddly proportioned, they're very wide, they're kind of big for the world around them, but I used to love this. You want to eat something? You just get this and blah, you just eat the whole plate. It's just, that still makes me laugh. That's one of my favorite things. They didn't really reproduce that super well in Underground, but, nobody's perfect, right? So, but just like that, the idea is that what was cool about this as well is it was almost very light Dark Souls in that there was a lot of exploration and not knowing things. The game doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you where the bosses are. It doesn't tell you anything about them, how to draw some of them out. It doesn't tell you really anything about the items and what they do. So you see here you have these different statistics for yourself, right? Now they're doubled up here because the other one's for the second player who's not here right now, but you can play this game 2-player local, of course. And by buying different food and items and books and things like that, you can actually, you can also change your speeds and stuff here. and your difficulty, you actually leveled up your statistics, which that was the sort of light RPG mechanics. So you see, for example, here, this is a bookstore that allows you to buy different combat moves, right? So I bought one there. Now, in River City Ransom Underground, you can buy food and actually keep it in your inventory to use later if you want. This game, you could buy stuff and keep it in your inventory, but it was non-food items. Food was always consumed immediately in this game. But, for example, this dragon feet thing. So you see there, I read that book, and I've now acquired dragon feet, which is basically a kick technique. So, alright, I accidentally used it again here. There we go. So you could do that, but you don't know what any of these things did. So the idea was that there was a lot of explanation in this. So you see there, because I got the dragon feet thing, I have this sort of rapid kick now. So there was only 2 buttons on the NES. So if you had your punch, your kick, and then if you wanted to jump, you had to press both buttons at once. And you can also pick up enemies and use them as weapons against other enemies as well if you press the punch button when you're up beside one on the ground and he's not already knocked out. And of course they have the iconic barf when they die, which is that's something they kept. A lot of these really badly translated lines and things are some of the things they kept in Underground, which I always really liked. Also, you can sort of time so there's no dedicated block button in this, but you can sort of time things out so that if you press the punch button when another guy's going to punch you, you can sort of counter them, which is always handy. But the idea was that as you progress through River City, so I died there, so I get to come back here and I lose some stuff. But the idea was that you would, let's buy some waffles, that you would level up and get more techniques and whatnot as you went on, and as you made your way through River City, things got harder and harder, and you had to level up to take out the final bosses. But the cool thing is that because this was pseudo open world and you could go anywhere you wanted, if you were really good at this game, you didn't have to level up. You could just walk right to the end if you want and take on the boss straight away if you like. And that was something you never saw in games like this, because most games on consoles back in this day were extremely linear affairs because they were obviously easier to design. And they were designed to be, generally most games of this era were actually very short, but they were also very difficult because that's how they padded out the length and made it so that you couldn't beat a game in like 5 minutes. And the thing with this game is, if you were good at it, and especially if you had another player, you could beat this in a relatively small amount of time on the default difficulty. You know, you could take out this, you could beat this game in about an hour or so if you were really good at it, and I believe back in the day some friends and I did that. But you didn't have to sit and level up, and you didn't have to. So we unlocked the boss here by clearing out this area. So he'll talk and give you a little intro, or you can just go right to town and start beating him up. But you see, I kind of screwed that up there, so that didn't work out so well. And this game did have a password system in it. The passwords were kind of redonkulous, as you can see there. But this would remember your inventory, it would remember what bosses you beat, and a number of other things like that. So it didn't have most third-party games on the NES, with few exceptions, didn't have battery backups because that actually cost a lot of money to produce. So the password system was kind of a pain, but it was there, so you could come back and work on things later. But that was what was cool, there was a lot of mystery in this. You know, you had the opportunity to if you were really good, you could go straight to the boss, or you could take your time in Turtle and really max out your stats and buy a crazy amount of new techniques and power-ups and things like that, and really take your time and go into them really over-leveled if you wanted. But it was up to you how you approached it. And that level of freedom and flexibility is just not something you saw very often in games like this, and it's why this is remembered so fondly, because it really is like, you know, I don't like to do the whole, oh, this is the Dark Souls of X, but in many ways it's obviously, you know, you couldn't do Dark Souls in the 8-bit world. It was kind of you couldn't do anything that involved back then, but this is what they were able to do in the 8-bit era, and it was just great in the sense that you could play this game multiple different ways each time, And there we go, I got him. Gotcha, sucker. So that's one boss down. One problem with this, though, is some areas, the going off the edge of the screen doesn't take you somewhere else, and if you run into that, you bash up against the wall and it hits you. So also, yeah, there's two malls very close together in this, which is a little strange. There aren't that many screens in this, to be honest with you. Ooh, what do we get for the nuclear spy? These are well-read gang members, of course. Also, in River City Ransom Underground, one of the things that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of is it has cops. So you can actually hurt innocent people in that game, and that will bring the cops out, which will you have to fight until you get into a hideout. There are no cops in this. When you're in mall areas like this, my attack buttons are completely disabled. So innocent people only walk around in here, and you can't hurt them. And there's no police to worry about. So, and there's a little bit of exposition here. This is Roxy, who is actually Slick's girlfriend, but doesn't like what he's doing, so she sort of works with you to help give you some information on this, just telling you where things are. So, but yeah, this is what I liked about this game, was the freedom and flexibility it gave you was just unprecedented and something you never saw a lot. And this was a great game to play over and over and over again because you could do it in so many different ways. And I really liked that. I thought it was a really cool and innovative thing. And frankly, it does surprise me that this game didn't do very well in the States and that it was really became a cult hit after the fact. You know, there's a million people who love it now, but at the time it didn't do very well, and that's why it ended up getting relegated to Japan after this. And in the US, for the most part, all you got out of Technos going forward was Double Dragon stuff and the occasional thing like Super Dodgeball or Super Spike V-Ball, which were frankly just beat-em-ups with a sports theme when you get right down to it. But yeah, this was really, really cool for the time, and it honestly still plays pretty well. I mean, River City Ransom Underground obviously is a bigger game. It has 4 players. It has online play. It has way more fighting moves in it, and way more levels and things you can learn. There's only 2 characters in this, whereas that has, I think, 5 or 6. Definitely quite a few. Why are you running? So this move's a little OP, I think, but yeah, you could do, you know, this still holds up and plays really well, and it runs fairly well. It doesn't slow down that often. You know, there's a wide variety of melee weapons available. Ow. The gangs are not that varied, frankly, because the gangs in this are really, in Underground there's more of them, and they all have very distinct styles and fighting moves and things like that. In this, for the most part, it's basically the same guys with different shirts, and they also have they're harder. You know, they have guys in here that have more hit points and things like that. You know what? I have exactly 975, and recharge is exactly what I need right now. So I have this as well. So this is technically not a food item, so I can use it in my inventory. I can carry it around. My strength went up. My willpower went up. My stamina is going to max out now. There we go. So there's another pair of bosses up here that I'm probably under-leveled for, but we'll give them a try. So it's right up in here. Benny and Clyde, of course. You know what? Shut up. Let's just go to town here. I might be able to pull these guys out. So, but yeah, this was a really iconic thing, but it did have several different spin-offs and variations in Japan. There actually were multiple versions of it in the United States as well. Well, not in the United States, actually, but there were multiple versions of this game that came out. There was... The NES version is the one people know, but there actually was a PC Engine version of this as well that was published by Naxat that was interesting because it had a full Red Book audio soundtrack, so CD audio. It also had fully voiced characters, which I don't know if they were in English. I'm assuming not. I can only imagine how bad that voice acting would have been if they were in English. But I probably will check out that version someday because I've actually never touched it, and I'd really like to find it and see. I'd actually really love to hear what the Red Book version of this soundtrack is too, because So one of the things about Technos, right, is Technos never really made full use of the NES sound chip. You know, their soundtracks were never bad, and they were somewhat memorable, but they were also fairly simplistic, especially when you compare them to things like some of the soundtracks that came out of, you know, Capcom, Konami, Sunsoft, developers like that. But this soundtrack is always memorable to me because it's just got this little sort of funky vibe to it, right? Like, it's weird when you read this the text in this game and stuff. It makes you wonder what Japan thought of what gangland violence in the US was like in the 80s, because obviously there was a much bigger problem with gang violence in the US in the 80s than there is now. But it's weird, right? Because you see the way these characters act and talk, and in many cases it kind of feels like they're this is almost like something that takes place in the 50s, right, instead of the 80s, and it makes you think, like, wow, did the Japanese really think that American, you know, gang violence was like this, where it was just where it was kind of like gangs out of happy, you know, almost in something like Happy Days that were that did this? I don't know. I just find it kind of amusing. Oh, I think I can get these guys. So when a guy's panting like that, that basically means that the next time you down him, he'll go out. So yeah, I took these guys out, so that's alright. Oh. But apparently you can dive into the water. I never did that back in the day. That's pretty funny. But you're sort of seeing how this goes, and your goal is just to make it through. So you see, I've taken the... Oh, I guess because I didn't leave the area, it didn't count me out. So that's pretty interesting. So, and that was the interesting thing, right? Is if you ran out of life in this, you weren't out until you actually got knocked down. So you could actually fight a whole bunch of guys with no life points if you wanted. As long as they didn't knock you down, you would be okay. There we go. All right, got him out there. So let's get out of here and see if it sticks this time. Oh no, these guys just keep coming back. Interestingly, most of the bosses, when they're down for good. So, but yeah, this is what was cool about this. I would definitely like to take a look at that 3DS game at some point. There were also some weird River City spin-offs, like River City, I believe it's called like River City Sports Challenge or something like that. But at some point, I'm definitely going to take a look at that PC Engine CD version, because I think that would be pretty cool. But this still holds up really well, honestly, and I really do wish we'd gotten more of them back in the day, but the cult following of this is what inspired River City Ransom Underground, which, as I said in my video, is far from flawless. It's got some problems, but it is a very, very faithful canonized sequel to this game, which I still hold up as one. Saying something is one of the best NES games ever is not a small claim to make, because I mean the NES had a lot of games on it and a lot of really good games, but for me personally, this is definitely up there, and it's one of my most favorite brawlers ever, just because rather than being just a linear go through each screen and take all the guys out progression, it's very much to a degree, make your own fun, or have your own discovery and sort of figure out the world and the mechanics within it at your own pace. You know, the game doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't over-tutorialize, it doesn't tutorialize at all, frankly. And it just says, hey, here's a world, you got an objective, you go figure it out how to do it and have some fun. And I think that's really cool. And, you know, in River City Ransom Underground, you can turn friendly fire off. That was not an option in this one. If you played this game two-player, you could hurt each other. And sometimes it was also great fun when I was playing this with people to just say, you know, when I was playing this with my friends, to just, you know, you accidentally would hit someone and then the other guy'd be like, hey, what'd you do that for? And you were like, oh, whatever. And you just, you know, everything would would deteriorate and people would beat the crap out of each other. That guy looked like he had a tire on his head, but he doesn't. You know, people would just beat the crap out of each other, and then we'd laugh about it, even though we'd both die and set our progress back. You know, and those are the kinds of experiences that a lot of games just didn't give you back in the day. It was really, this was really something unique, and that's why it's so important to me. And you know, having covered the remake and this being such an important game to my gaming history, I think it's it did not make sense to not talk about it. So yeah, I wanted to do that now. But this game, thankfully, it's relatively easy to play it yourself if you want. I mean, they did do the Game Boy Advance remake earlier this decade, but it is also, I believe, it is still out there. It was on both the Wii and 3DS Virtual Console services. So you can play it there. The Wii Virtual Console is available on the Wii U as well. So there are ways to play this if you want, or you could also get the Game Boy Advance version, or maybe Tokyo Rumble's good. I honestly have no idea if that's any good or not, but there are definitely ways to get this yourself today. And I would highly recommend it. If you're into NES games, this is one of the best. And just from a historical game design perspective, it is a really, really important piece of gaming history, I think. From a developer who before this had pretty much made only those linear beat-em-ups that I talked about, and they decided to take this one in a different direction, and I think did some pretty impressive things with it. So yeah, that is River City Ransom, developed and published by Technos Japan Corporation in 1989. We are playing the NES version, though it's available. Though it is available in some other places, this is really the iconic one. Good game, even to this day. And you have a couple different ways to do this now, because you can play this, or you can play Underground for a modernization. So it's, yeah, two really good brawlers, and I definitely recommend it. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked what you saw here, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. That does help me out a great deal. If you want to watch something else, check out the videos on screen now, and don't forget to follow @PXA Media on Twitter to find out about new stuff first.